Senior Minister Tharman
Tharman Shanmugaratnam has put forward himself to run in the presidential election.
Singaporeans need an optimistic future, and I believe I can serve in a way that supports that.
He has more than 20 years of experience in politics and resigned from all political positions last month.
And if someone can't escape from their past affiliation and exercise independent judgment, then they're not suitable.
He's a strong candidate. Does that become the PAP's fault?
The political heft, that Mr. Tharman brings with him, will be something that will be sorely felt.
In the next phase of how I could serve, it should be above politics. I don't think anyone disagrees that we need to do much better here.
His campaign slogan is respect for all.
No one should be a nobody in Singapore. We've got to deepen our respect for ordinary people, for those who need a second or third chance. Everyone can be somebody.
Why should young adults in Singapore vote for you? Hello and welcome back to another episode of Political Prude, the podcast. Now guys, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but in today's episode, we have former Senior Minister and now presidential hopeful, Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam on the show. It's real guys, he's here, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Now earlier in June, he announced that he intended to run in the 2023 presidential elections, and he has since announced his campaign slogan as well, respect for all. In today's episode, for the next 1 hour, we'll find out more about his motivation behind running for presidency, and we'll also try to get to know him on a more personal level outside of politics. We'll ask him why he believes that he's suited for this role of President of Singapore, and I think more importantly, we'll ask him why he should get your vote. Before we dive into this episode, please remember to subscribe and also give us a thumbs up. Trust me guys, this is not the only guest that will leave you shook. So you don't want to miss out on any single thing. So hit that subscribe button. And now, enjoy the episode. Mr. Tharman, welcome to Political Prude, the podcast.
Hi.
So excited to have the next hour with you to get to know you as an individual, really.
Thanks, and getting to know you as well.
So when you first announced that you were going to be running for president, I don't know if you were on the internet, but it really just went crazy. Twitter was talking all about it, Instagram stories, everyone was posting about it. And what I really saw was like two main camps of people. Like one camp was really saying, I think we're going to be losing a good minister. And then the other camp was saying, actually, Mr. Tharman is quite a unifying figure, which then makes him then a good president, right? So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on all of these different sentiments that people have?
Well, I've dedicated my entire adult life to serving Singapore and serving Singaporeans. It's our home. First half of that period was in the public service. You can say civil servant. Second half was in politics, on the ground, and in government as a national policy maker. And after thinking very hard about it, I felt that in the next phase of how I could serve, it should be above politics, outside politics, serving Singaporeans from all walks of life, bridging differences in views, and bringing optimism to Singapore. We need an optimistic future. And I think I can add to that.
Nice. For a long time now, there was a lot of calls for you to be the Prime Minister of Singapore. Even until today, when I'm talking about the presidency, about you and running for it, people on Instagram still reply my stories and say, okay, but he should be PM, So you have consistently turned down those calls because you said that you wanted to be kind of like a team player, right? So maybe you can share your perspective on that and why you've been turning the calls down. And at the same time, maybe explain to us why this is different, running for president.
Well, the analogy I used, because I grew up entirely in sports, was that whatever sport I played, I was never the striker. I was never centre forward. I was always playing centre half, half back, full back. And I enjoyed thinking about the game and strategizing. I was never the one who liked scoring the goals. And maybe I wasn't good at scoring goals. And that's an instinct that stayed with me through life. I like contributing, I like thinking, I like listening, I like bridging views. I feel I've played a very useful role over the 22 years on the ground in Jurong, as well as elsewhere in Singapore and in government. In this new role, I think, you're not a centre forward, you're not a striker. You're not an alternative center of power to government. You're a unifier, and you've got to represent Singapore internationally, which is what I've been doing for a long time. I feel I can add something different to the presidency because it's going to be a very different time. The next 5, 10, 15 years are going to be quite different from before. Here at home in Singapore, we are changing as a society, for the better in most ways. And internationally, it's going to be a very troubling time. So I decided that I should step out of politics and play this new role if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, because both domestically and internationally, I bring something that can help Singapore as we go forward.
Could you run us through your thought process when you decided to run for presidency? At what point did you say, okay, I think this is something I'm going to consider seriously?
Well, it started several months ago because people came to talk to me wherever I was. I sit down in a hawker center in Taman Jurong, people come up and talk to me. Not just my own residents, but people from wherever. Singaporeans love eating everywhere. And more people over the last year were telling me that I should consider this. And I thought very hard about it because I was quite comfortable with my role as it was as a senior minister in Singapore, contributing internationally and flying the Singapore flag in various global councils and panels that I was chairing. I was quite comfortable doing that. But I was increasingly concerned about our future because we are in a transition domestically in Singapore and internationally. I think the domestic transition will work out well, but it'll take some time. And the international transition that we are seeing because of conflicts internationally may or may not work out well. And small countries can be quite badly affected by that. So I just felt that at this stage, I should step out of government and politics completely and play a role as a head of state representing Singapore internationally, but also working on the initiatives on the ground that I feel bring people together. I've been doing it for a long time, together with my wife and others. But as a president who's outside politics, outside government, I'll be able to do a lot more of it.
In order to do so, and in order to run for this presidency, you had to resign from the party and also your role and your posts, right? Did you have a conversation with PM Lee about doing so, and how did the conversation go?
Well, once I thought through it, of course you have to have a discussion with the Prime Minister. You can't suddenly resign without informing anyone. And we had a good conversation, and he understood and appreciated my motivations because he's known me as someone who's been just dedicated to public service. He wrote me a letter on the day I resigned, which is it's a public information, expressing his views. So that was natural. Of course, you have to talk to the Prime Minister.
Got it. So I want to know what the presidency under you can look like. We have seen many different presidents now, and all of them have their own style and own focus in their terms. So what would your key focuses be?
Well, I've always wanted to stay true to character. I've never wanted to change my personality depending on what job I'm doing or what role I'm playing. In many ways, I'm still the same youth I was on the sports field. In many ways, by the way. In many ways, I'm still the same young person who was a student activist and, in fact, a critic for many years. In many ways, I'm the economist and the thinker who's been very active in both domestic and international debates. And in many ways, I'm someone who's just found the most rewarding experience in life to be serving people in Jurong day in, day out, and helping them to uplift themselves. I don't intend to change. You are what you are. I don't intend to turn into a whole new personality just because I might be president, assuming I'm lucky enough to be elected. I will be myself. And it means that I will continue to focus on how we uplift people on the ground who don't get enough attention, how we listen harder to voices that are not being heard, and very importantly, how we deepen our respect for each other. We've got to deepen our respect for ordinary people, deepen our respect for the poor, the disadvantaged, the single mum, deepen our respect for those who need a second or third chance, and sometimes a fourth chance. Never look down on people. Never look down on people. I feel we still have to deepen that culture of respect for each other. And it comes from activities, actions by voluntary groups helping individuals and families, but it comes really from empowering people rather than simply looking at them as those who need help and therefore you provide help as and when. It's never as and when. It's a relationship. It's ultimately a friendship.
So you mentioned some of the groups that you feel like have not been heard. I've been following you on Instagram, and I've been looking at the different activities that you've been working on. I see that you have engaged a lot of young people in the various sessions. What were some of the things that were brought forward that maybe you feel like, okay, I'm gonna maybe pay attention to some of these if I become president?
Well, for me, of course, it's not a recent activity, listening to people, young or old. I've been doing it for a long time, more than 22 years. I've been doing it all along. In fact, I haven't had a very strong social media presence. It's only now that I'm building it up, but I've been doing it on the ground all along, just interacting with people all the time. I think, first, we must never underestimate how down people can feel when they're poor, when they're not respected at work, and when they're not respected in the community. Never underestimate how down they can feel, or even humiliated. So we must never look down on people. If someone needs help, get to know them, get to understand what their challenges are, help them through it, help equip them, and help them earn their own success, because that's how they get dignity and pride. So that's been my approach all along. I think we need more of it in Singapore, and it's not just the poor and the disadvantaged, but anyone who needs a second or third chance. And I also think we need to not just respect each other's faiths and religions and cultures, but we need to participate more in each other's cultures. We are a wonderful place. We are multicultural. We take very easily to Western music and influences and films, for instance. It just comes naturally, right? It's in the air all the time. We don't put as much effort into really being inserted in each other's cultures, not just tolerating each other and living together, but inserted in each other's cultures. It's a real opportunity for us to deepen that multiculturalism in Singapore. Everyone learns something of another culture, be it a bit of conversational language, or in art or music. Listen to each other's cultures a lot more. It's a blessing we have, being multicultural, and we need to make much more of it.
You know, some of the other presidential hopefuls have come forward to say the role of the president is supposed to be apolitical, and they have been really emphasizing in their messaging to the public, to the media, that they are truly independent. And because of your background with the PAP for many, many years now, how do you intend to be above politics if you take on the role as president?
Right. Well, first, the president must be someone with independence of mind, someone who can reach an independent judgment on his own. That's critical. Independence of mind is different from saying that you must be independent of all past affiliations, be it from the PAP or Workers' Party or PSP or any political party. Independence of mind doesn't mean you must not have been a top civil servant who owed your job to the ministers above you. Independence of mind doesn't mean that you cannot have been a private business person who might have had affiliations with lots of private businesses. It doesn't mean the person can't be independent of that if they become president. So everyone has past affiliations. And there are some people in life who stick to their past affiliations and exhibit blind loyalty. There's some people like that. But they are not the leaders. We are talking here about a president. A president has to be a leader. And if someone can't escape from their past affiliations and exercise independent judgment, then they're not suitable. I myself am well known in government and outside, indeed even in the opposition, as having been non-partisan and by nature, and I've had an independent mind all the way, including from before I joined government even. So I don't think anyone who knows me doubts that. But let's look at each person's character, their track record, whether they've really exhibited the empathy that they talk about, and whether they have the capability. Independent-mindedness in this job is critical, and it has to go together with capability and a track record. So that's the way I look at it. Past affiliations are a very superficial way of looking at this. We have to think larger about the leaders that we want to elect and not assume that people are trapped by having been in the private sector or having been a top civil servant or being a member of a political party. Or for that matter, many people have been voting for the same party all their lives. Does it mean that we have to look into people's voting records as well to determine if they are independent? Clearly not. We'll be ruling out a large part of Singapore. So let's look at each individual, what they really bring, and whether they have a record in all their interactions and in their reputation for being independent-minded and having a strong enough mind of their own to judge for themselves.
So for GE 2020, you did really, really well. I think one of the things that we all felt were like, okay, he's a strong contender coming into this presidency. Do you feel confident when you first announced, obviously no one else was saying that they were going to run yet. Now you've seen kind of who is stepping forward and saying, okay, I want to run too, and I want to throw my head into the ring too. How do you feel about them, and how are you confident in this election?
I feel each of them brings something. I've known some of them. I like a lot about their experience, their life experience. I think they each bring something different and should be taken seriously. I like the competition. That's what Singaporeans need. They need to choose between people. I think I stand on my own record, and my own record goes back a long way. And I must say that if I was merely standing as a technocrat who was the managing director of the MAS 22 years ago and coming straight into this and contesting for the presidential elections, I would be a very different candidate from today. But I'm today someone who is not just a top civil servant, but someone who's got real experience on the ground for many years, helping people, bridging differences, unifying people, creating community spirit. 22 years of shifting our policy so that they can be more fair and socially just. And 22 years of serving internationally, because I've been chairing various global councils for some time and flying the Singapore flag high. So I bring a different combination of capabilities. I don't like comparing myself with anyone else, but I feel that the combination of capabilities I have, and ultimately my character, is one which could enable this presidency to be different and suited to different times, very new times.
So we will talk about some of the achievements that you've had, with your career. But for now, you did mention your work on the ground, and I think a lot of people, especially like when it comes to you, forget that you were an MP. You were on the ground speaking to people, your constituencies, like every week, and you got to know
a few times a week.
And you got to hear some of the issues that they face, the problems that they needed help with. How does that entire experience for over 20 plus years color the way you think as a policymaker and as a leader of a country?
Well, it's given me a lot of humility. When you interact and really get to know people on the ground, you realize they're not defined just by their jobs or their incomes or their race. They're not defined by whether they are up or down in the social ladder. They have their own personality, their aspirations, their own feelings. And getting to know them has been the most rewarding part of my whole experience. It makes you humble. You know that we are all equals at the end of the day. We are all equals. Some people are luckier than others, but we are all equals. And when we help each other to do better, we are all ourselves better people. I've learned that from experience, not because you read it in a book or it makes for a nice speech. I've learned from experience that when you put a lot of effort into helping someone else uplift themselves, do better, achieve what they want, when they take a stumble, help them to come back up, you yourself become a better person and the whole community becomes better. So I believe very deeply in that. But it requires respect. It requires real respect and never looking down on people.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. Hey guys, we'll get back to the conversation really shortly, but we'll really appreciate it if you can give us a subscribe and also a thumbs up if you're enjoying what you're listening to. And now, back to the conversation. So I want to get to know you maybe on a more personal level. How are you like outside work? You know, what are you like as a family man?
Well, most people, especially younger people, only know me as, Senior Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and Finance Minister, or whatever. I grew up very differently from many of my colleagues because I was a pure sportsman in my youth. I had great difficulty studying because I couldn't concentrate in class. I just had a problem concentrating for more than 5 minutes in every class, all the way through school. And I had to do last-minute study just before exams, just to get to the next level. But I was a consummate sports person, totally occupied every single day of the year, literally every single day of the year. And sports made me respectful of everyone in the team, including the reserves, by the way. We often forget the reserves. They train. They didn't get into the top 11, the first 11. They're waiting on the sidelines, hoping that the coach will one day tell them, look, why don't you go in now? We should always call on our reserves. Always call on our reserves. But I just learned to respect people. And, in those days when I was young, we had sporting talent all around the country. Naval Base Secondary, Hawaii, everywhere you went. And when you took part in competitive sports, inter-school competitions, national competitions, you met people from all over the country, very different backgrounds, and became friends. And also had respect for the fact that they were often better than you. So that just grew with me in sports. So I was a sportsman, I was a student activist, as someone who, together with my wife and family, loves music, spanning about 5 decades. By the way, the music of the 70s was really cool, it was really cool. Never think it was something for oldies. It was really cool stuff. And we just enjoy family life, relaxing when I'm outside of, the heavy duty work stuff.
So you mentioned music, and I am obsessed with Spotify playlists. I'm always trying to discover some, and I'm always forming my own. And of course, when it comes to you, I think about President Obama, right? He releases this playlist at the end of every year. So now I'm curious, if you were to put together a playlist of your own, what kind of songs would be on there?
Well, it actually spans decades, but the music of the 70s was really cool.
Okay.
So take it seriously. And it's partly me, my wife, some of the influence of my kids. I would put, not in any order,
okay,
Zombie by the Cranberries, which is
one.
also a very meaningful song, meaningful song. I would put local songs. I'll put Gataran Jiwa, again from the 50s, P. Ramlee, must be there, a real classic. If I had to choose a Chinese song, it'll be An Jing by Jay Chou. I like the way he sings it as well. I will choose something by Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. I'll choose something by Dire Straits, probably Brothers in Arms. Something by Bob Dylan, way before the time of today's younger generation, but he was a genius. I'll probably choose one of his lesser-known songs, All Along the Watchtower. I'll choose something by Jimi Hendrix. Not Hey Joe, which is very well known. I'll choose The Wind Cries Mary.
Okay.
I'll choose Whiter Shade of Pale. Not the original, but the version sung by Annie Lennox of Eurythmics fame, but she sings it very differently. I will choose Angie by the Rolling Stones. What else will I choose? I'll choose something by Coldplay. I'll choose Yellow.
Of course, oh my god, classic, yes.
I will choose Miley Cyrus's Flowers.
Really?
Something by Cyndi Lauper,
Okay.
Time After Time. I have to choose something by Paul Simon. Maybe The Boxer, a classic. Something by Cesar Ivoria,
Okay.
who came from a very tough background in a tiny island of Africa. Soldade. I'll choose something by Victor Hara,
Okay.
who is also a political activist in Latin America, in Chile. Amanda, that's quite a lot already.
Yeah, that's a whole playlist, but I have maybe 2 songs that I want to recommend. So the first is Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush.
Okay.
It recently got viral because of Stranger Things, which I would highly recommend you and Mrs. Tharman to watch.
Okay.
It's a big sleigh show. Please watch it on Netflix. And then the second song is by a very dear friend, Benjamin King. So he has a new album. It's called Gloomy Boogie.
I will listen to Benjamin King because I like him.
He's so slay. Right. He is so slay.
Right.
And the song is called Rock Bottom Blues. It's a little bit of like a sad one, but I like it a lot. A sad but vibes.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Right. I mean, I actually like our National Day songs. It's just I'm not sure they're on Spotify. They probably aren't.
They are. No, you have to tell us, what is your favorite National Day song?
Home.
Okay lah. Other than Home. I feel like Home is the go-to for everyone.
No, I think Home is just more emotive. It's less rah-rah, but it's emotive.
Okay.
I would stick with Home.
Okay.
And it will last.
It will last.
It will last.
It's basically the second national anthem, as I would say it.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
Okay, I randomly thought of this, but if you were to become the president, how likely are you to form a WhatsApp group chat with Madam Halima and Mr. Tony Tan and say, Prezzies in Singapore?
I wouldn't mind that at all, actually.
What do you think you guys will talk
about? And with their spouses. I wouldn't mind that at all. You know, everyone has contributed in different ways. Presidents, community leaders, you know, people who serve for years on the ground as MPs, regardless of which party they're in, our hospital workers, you know, everyone has contributed. So I don't want to be known as someone who starts a WhatsApp group only with heads of state. I like to just interact with people from all walks of life.
Now let's talk about running for presidency. And I'm sure you had to then speak with your family on it.
Right.
How were their reactions like?
Well, my wife and I discussed it together because we made the decision together. It's not as if I decided and then informed my family. Okay. So we had to think through it very carefully. It took us several weeks because it's a major change for me. It takes me out of policy making, but it gives me the opportunity to be a lot more involved in that, developing that culture of respect that I talk about on the ground, more involvement on the ground. Also, I will continue to play the international roles that I play, some of the existing ones and perhaps some new ones, because Singapore must never be viewed as just a small country. We've got to have standing in the world, and I intend to contribute in that regard as well. And of course, when it comes to the executive powers of the presidency, which the Constitution provides for, the custodial powers, as they are called, over past reserves and to protect the integrity of the public service. Of course, that's where I've got a huge amount of experience, because it's principally a task of understanding budgetary policies, understanding our economic challenges, and in future, understanding not just the crises that are going to come, because crises will come, but also understanding the long-term challenge of climate change and what it requires for Singapore, what types of infrastructural investments we have to make. And I happen to have a long, many years of experience thinking and working on these issues, both here in Singapore and internationally. And I'll be able to play that role to the full.
So on that note, I just want to go into the next part of the conversation where I want to talk to you about how your key contributions and successes can shape your role as a president. So you have worn many, many hats, in your long political journey. So I'm just going to read off this list so that I don't get anything wrong. So you were the Minister for Education, Finance and Manpower. You were the Deputy Prime Minister, the Chairman of MAS, and most recently the Coordinating Minister for Social Policies, and also then the Senior Minister of Singapore. So in the movie Slumdog Millionaire, he was kind of like looking back at all these different experiences, and all of them helped him achieve this one goal, right? So same question to you, like if let's say there was one key learning thing from each of these roles that you took on over the last 20 years, what would each one be?
Well, although I'm seen mainly for my roles as a key policymaker in economics and finance through my various roles. What gave me greater satisfaction was education. I was an education minister for 5 years when we started liberalizing the system, making it more flexible, removing primary school streaming, removing school ranking and modifying it, and creating many more pathways. And it's not just the big policy changes that matter. I take great satisfaction at having started Northlight, an Assumption pathway school for those who couldn't get past their PSLE with a pass grade. I take great satisfaction in the new routes we created for ITE students to go on and get a diploma, many more poly students being able to go on and get a degree, but basically freeing up the system. There's still work to be done there, and I've stayed with education all through the years, even after I stepped down as an education minister. It's still the most important way in which we bring optimism to Singaporeans. Constant investment in young people as well as people through their lives, through what we now call Skills Future, which I led starting from 8 years ago.
Nice. So how will things change, if when it comes to you approaching the job as the past as a minister and whatnot, and then now as a president, if let's say you get elected?
Well, social mobility remains a key mission for Singapore and has been part of my purpose. I will no longer be a policy maker, but I intend to very actively support initiatives on the ground by VWOs, by other civil society organizations, often working together with schools and other agencies to really make it real when we talk about everyone, regardless of background, having a chance to discover their strengths and do well. One of the things that strikes me about Singapore is that there are a fair number of young people who just feel they're nobodies. You go to school, they're nobody. Try and take part in CCA, well, didn't make it to the first team, they're nobodies. No one should be a nobody in Singapore. No one. Everyone should be somebody. Knowing discovering their own skills, developing their own confidence, contributing in their own way. Everyone must be somebody, and we can make it so. And that's also social mobility. It's not just how you move up the educational ladder, not just how your incomes go up, which of course they must. It's how you're regarded, how you're respected, for the skill you bring, for the job well done, for the way you care for others.
I think a lot of us tend to forget that, especially in today's generation where we feel like, oh, everybody's like me on social media, right? But then not everyone is like that. And there are some people who are left behind, So I do think it's really important that we don't forget them as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk to you now about your presidential campaign, right? Your tagline is respect for all. Tell me about that.
Well, it's consistent with what I believe most deeply in. You can have policy making. Our policies are moving in the right direction. They're becoming fairer. There's more support for the poor. There's a progressive wage model. More support for first-time homeowners. Policies are important. But policies on their own do not create a socially just society. Policies on their own do not create an optimistic society. It's our culture ultimately that matters. And by culture, I mean the way people relate to each other, the way we regard each other and the way we treat each other. And a culture of respect for all still needs to be developed in Singapore. We are a fair-minded people. We are not, there's very little bigotry in Singapore between different races and religions. No one despises the poor. We are fair-minded people, but you don't have that deep culture of respect, I feel. And we can develop it. Develop it for everyone, regardless of what job they're doing, as long as they're trying to do it well. Help them to keep improving their skills and contribute to others. And help them in the community. Be full members of the community. Never feeling that they're not really wanted.
When it comes to developing a culture in an entire country, it will take time, right? So how do you think we can start working on developing the culture of respect, especially starting with the younger generation?
Well, it takes real initiatives. I mean, my wife and I started Tasik Jurong, for instance, in Jurong 10 years ago. In fact, it was started by a group of ex-inmates from Changi prison who came out. We got to know them well, and we told them, you go and run this. And they started a scheme for youngsters with football and mentorships. We eventually now have added in tuition, dance, a whole set of activities. We are one of the largest girls' football programs in Singapore, probably the largest, I think. And it's not just about picking up football skills. It's about giving people confidence, helping them in their studies, helping them know that they can be somebody. Everyone can be somebody. They can be heroes in their own stories.
Got it. You know, we are in an age of social media, right? And I feel like there are some people who maybe get emboldened by the fact that they can be anonymous online. And then that's where I feel like some of the disrespect comes, because you can just feel free to say whatever you want, especially to public figures like yourself. Do you have anything to say to that?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. There's no solution to this yet internationally. It's not as bad here as it is in some other countries, like in the US, where it's really polarized society and people are very much in their own bubbles. It's not as bad here, I feel. We have trolls. We have lots of trolls. But by and large, I think Singaporeans are, they're able to tell a troll from, they're able to tell who the trolls are, and they're fair-minded people. I hope we can improve that culture on the internet. I hope so. In the meantime, I'm someone who just doesn't want to let either praise or criticism get too much to my head. Just do the right thing, do the best you can, and stay true to your mission.
So as we're talking about respect for all, to me, all also includes people who are in Singapore but maybe not Singaporeans. And in the recent conversation online is really focusing on, the migrant workers being transported at the back of lorries. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we have to work more urgently to shift to a system where they are transported in a more decent and safe way. We know the problems. It's a big business cost issue for the businesses. There are logistical problems. You've got to have a lot more private buses. You need drivers for the buses. You need a fairly sophisticated system of logistics, because typically you'll have many different work sites, people coming from different dormitories. If you don't plan it well, the roads get congested. But it can be done. It can be done. If we apply our minds to it, we can do it. And I think it requires more urgency in the interests of the workers themselves, but also because that's what we should be like as a society. So I don't think anyone disagrees that we need to do much better here. And indeed, if you talk about it in Parliament, you've had parliamentarians from both sides who've been making this call for some time. So it's not about a simple ban by tomorrow, but work out a practical solution quickly. Work with the leading employers. Some are already doing it, which shows it can be done. But it requires some coordination, because it's actually a complex logistics exercise. And that coordination, to my mind, can be achieved. So for moral reasons, as well as to show the Singapore way, let's do this with greater urgency.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. So I want to bring back the conversation to your campaign. So you have been, outside of the presidential election itself, you have been going through many GEs now. What is your favorite part or your least favorite part about the campaigning period?
Well, my approach all along, and I'm not saying this because it sounds good, has been to never start working when a GE is coming. Just work throughout the year, week after week, month after month. Don't think too much about votes. I've always told my fellow volunteers on the ground, don't think too much about votes. If I thought a lot about votes, I won't be spending 3 or 4 weeks on an individual case that I feel I can really help the person on. And I often do that. Spending 3 or 4 weeks on one case. If it was just about votes, that's just one vote. You find a different way of allocating your time. But it's not about votes. It's about transforming that person's life. And you know that effort that you put in is really going to transform that person's life. And when it does and they come back and they themselves want to contribute to others, That's how community spirit is built up. And that's the real purpose. So I've never honestly thought too much about votes. I just work throughout the year, build up volunteers, enjoy ourselves, become good friends, have enough time to crack jokes, and the results are whatever they are. They've turned out okay.
This time around for this PE, the first-time voters, the age group ranges from 21 all the way to 33. So they're all young adults at this point, all voting for the first time. What are some of your strategies or intentions in trying to resonate with them and reach out to them?
Well, first, I have been interacting with that age group for a long time because I've been on the ground in Jurong. I mean, that's what I've been doing for many years, right? So it's not as if I now am suddenly planning an outreach strategy. I've been interacting with them all along. I think the young are actually not radically different. I mean, if you talk about those in their early 20s, they're not so different from those in their late 20s or early 30s, maybe listening to different music, having some different habits. But Singaporeans, by and large, they want to see a better future. They want good careers. They'd like to get started on a family very often. They want fairness in society. Those basic values are very widely shared amongst the young as well as the not so young. They're just widely shared. Most of the young people I interact with are interested in very practical things. They're interested in jobs, how they can do well for themselves. They like fair play. So I haven't had difficulty reaching the young in that sense. I'm building up my social media presence, which I was never very strong on, because that's an additional way of reaching the young. But I just want to emphasize that I've been interacting for many years on the ground with young people. And it's not just when they reach voting age, because you interact with them starting from kindergarten. And the nice thing about working 22 years on the ground is that the people in kindergarten are now in their mid-20s.
You mentioned social media, and you haven't been on Instagram until recently.
Until recently, yes.
Why the reluctance? Because I'm a huge fan of Instagram.
Right.
I use it every day,
I actually had no reluctance. I just concentrated on other things. I knew I had to do it someday. I was on Facebook, but even then, most people know my Facebook posts were not very frequent. I guess because I was still able to achieve everything I wanted to achieve in Jurong on the ground and in national policy making without being very active in the social media, I just put it aside. I knew I had to get into it at some point, but I just put it aside. So that's the only reason. And I'm now learning how to be more active on the social media. But my whole approach has been interact face to face, sit down, have a chat, get to know people, look each other in the eyes. That's been my approach. And I won't give that up. But I will be a little more active on the social media.
So you talked about learning about social media. What are some things that have maybe surprised you so far when it comes to the social media space?
I suppose the fact that people make up their minds very quickly on whether a post is worth watching to the end of a video. They make up their mind extremely quickly, maybe within a second or 3 seconds, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's something I've learned.
Has social media maybe allowed you to understand that you are able to reach out to people in a different way and still connect with them? Maybe
Yes,
not
it has. It has. I've learned something about that. So especially since, not everyone in Singapore has met me, obviously. People in Jurong know me well, but not everyone has met me. It's useful to have the social media and for it not just to be the heavy stuff, but just have a sense of your personality and your likes and dislikes also, mainly your likes, to be evident on social media.
When it comes to the overall campaign messages that you're trying to push out during this period, what are some key things that you want people to remember?
Well, actually remember the values that I'm advocating as my campaign theme. Respect for all. Ordinary people, the poor, the single mother, person who needs a second chance. Deeper respect for different races and faiths. Deeper building of solidarity. That's really what I'd like people to remember. Respect for all.
And my final question for you is, why should young adults in Singapore vote for you?
Well, I think whether it's young, slightly less young, middle-aged or older, I frankly am someone who knows how to build optimism, who knows how to bridge differences. I've never found in my experience that there are differences in opinion and views that cannot be bridged. You might not come to an identical position, but you can come very close. I've never felt that way. So I feel I can help Singapore be an optimistic place at a time when there's going to be a lot going against us internationally, and even at a time when people's views start diverging more domestically. We can stay optimistic, stay united as Singaporeans.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tharman. So that's all I really have for this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to speak to us on this podcast, and I really hope that everybody will be able to understand how you think as a leader and also get to understand who you are as a person, really.
No, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks very much.
And with that, we've come to the end of this episode of Political Prude, the podcast. Now, guys, I didn't know if Mr. Tharman would actually say yes to this show, and I was honestly holding my breath all the way until he actually showed up at the studio, and I was like, oh, hi. So I hope I made his time worth it, and I hope that you were able to get to know him better as an individual, a leader, and lastly, a presidential candidate. Once again, we'll really appreciate it if you can give us a thumbs up if you liked what you saw, and also hit that subscribe button because it will mean so much to us. Now, don't forget to also share this podcast with your friends and family if you think it's going to be helpful for them. And I will see you on the next episode of Political Prude, the podcast. This was the Zoda Pop Podcast.